Imagine having a party so exclusive, there's a no-fly zone over it. That's just the start of Putin's crazy secret gatherings. We're talking ice rinks, casinos, and underground tunnels leading to the beach. But here's the thing. While he's throwing these insane parties, most Russians can barely afford rent. Let's take a look inside this hidden world of luxury. Check this out. Putin's got a $1.3 billion palace that's like 70 average Russian apartments combined. It's got an ice rink, a pole dancing room, and even an underground bunker. Meanwhile, most Russians are living in tiny apartments, struggling to make ends meet. But that's nothing compared to what's coming up. We're going to show you some of the craziest features of this place. Like there's a secret tunnel that goes straight to a private beach. And get this, there's a whole underground complex for surviving wars or revolutions. It's wild how different Putin's world is from regular Russian life. The $1.30 billion price tag. Let's talk about the crazy price tag on Putin's palace. We're not just talking millions here. This place costs $1.3 billion. That's billion with a B. To put that in perspective, that's enough money to buy every single person in Moscow a brand new iPhone. Or you could pay the average Russian salary for over 43,000 years. But Putin didn't use this money to help regular Russians. Nah, he built himself a mega mansion that's bigger than 70 average Russian apartments combined. We're talking 190,000 square feet of pure luxury. That's like having a football field and a half just for your house. And get this, while Putin's chilling in his billion-dollar pad, the average Russian is struggling to make ends meet. The typical salary in Russia is about $500 a month, so it would take the average Russian over 216,000 years to save up enough to buy Putin's palace. That's longer than humans have even existed. But wait, it gets even crazier. Remember how we said there's an ice rink and a pole dancing room? Well, those are just the tip of the iceberg. This place has got stuff you wouldn't believe. There's a freaking casino in there. And not just any casino, we're talking a full-on Las Vegas-style setup. And you know how rich people love their wine? Putin's got that covered too. There's a massive underground wine cellar that can hold thousands of bottles. We're talking about enough booze to keep a party going for years. But here's where it gets really wild. While Putin's got all this crazy luxury, most Russians are living in Soviet-era apartments that are falling apart. We're talking about places where the heat doesn't always work and the pipes are constantly bursting. And it's not just the housing that's rough for average Russians. The economy's been hit hard by sanctions and falling oil prices. A lot of people are struggling just to afford basic necessities. Meanwhile, Putin's got a palace with gold-plated everything. This isn't just about a fancy house. It's about the massive gap between the ultra-rich and everyone else in Russia. Putin's palace is like a symbol of all that inequality. It's a big middle finger to all the regular Russians who are just trying to get by. No-fly zone. We're talking about a no-fly zone that covers the entire area. That's right, no planes, no drones, nothing in the air above this place. It's like Putin's got his own private sky. Now, most Russians? They're lucky if they've got a working security camera in their apartment building. But Putin's got a security setup that would make Fort Knox jealous. We're talking about state security forces on constant guard duty. These aren't your average mall cops. These are highly trained operatives keeping watch 24/7. And it's not just the sky that's off limits. The palace is surrounded by 17,000 acres of woods. That's like having a small country as your backyard. No nosy neighbors peeking over the fence here. But here's the thing. Why all this crazy security? What's Putin trying to hide? The Kremlin keeps saying the palace doesn't belong to Putin. But if that's true, why the insane protection? It's like putting a military-grade lock on your lunchbox. Kinda makes you wonder what's inside, right? And get this. While Putin's living in his personal fortress, most Russians are dealing with way different security concerns. They're worried about stuff like pickpockets on the subway or break-ins at their apartments. The average Russian doesn't have a team of elite guards watching their back. It's not just about keeping people out, though. This level of security is also about keeping things in. Secrets, maybe. Or maybe it's just Putin being paranoid. When you're one of the most powerful people in the world, you probably sleep with one eye open. But seriously, what could be so important that it needs this kind of protection? Is it just about privacy, or is there something more going on? Maybe it's where Putin keeps all his rare Pokemon cards, or maybe it's where he practices his secret talent as a world-class figure skater. Hey, with that private ice rink, anything's possible. The craziest part? This isn't even the most secure place in Russia. That would be the Kremlin itself. But the fact that Putin's personal pad has security that rivals the seat of Russian government, that's pretty wild. Now I know what you're thinking. Maybe it's just standard security for a world leader. But here's the thing, most world leaders don't have private palaces with their own no-fly zones. Even the White House doesn't have that kind of airspace restriction. Ice rink and pole dancing room. This place has got an ice rink and a pole dancing room. Yeah, you heard that right. While most Russians are hanging out at local bars or parks, Putin's got his own private winter wonderland and strip club. Let's start with the ice rink. This ain't your average neighborhood frozen pond. We're talking about a full-size, professional-grade ice rink inside the palace. It's like having your own personal NHL arena. Putin can practice his hockey skills or host figure skating competitions whenever he wants. Meanwhile, most Russians are lucky if they can find a patch of frozen ground to skate on in the winter. But the ice rink is just the warm-up. The real showstopper is the pole dancing room. Yep, Putin's got his own strip club built right into his house. This room is decked out with all the latest club lighting, sound systems, and of course plenty of poles. It's like bringing the hottest Moscow nightclub right to your living room. Now your average Russian, they might hit up a local bar or club on the weekends. Maybe they'll catch a movie or hang out in a park. But Putin, he's got his own private entertainment complex. It's like having Las Vegas in your basement. And here's the thing, these aren't just random luxuries. They're designed for hosting some seriously wild parties. Imagine the kind of gatherings that go down here. You've got world leaders, oligarchs, and who knows who else, all partying it up in Putin's private playground. But while Putin's throwing these insane bashes, most Russians are dealing with a very different reality. The average monthly salary in Russia is about $500. That wouldn't even cover the electric bill for Putin's ice rink for a day. And while Putin's guests are sliding down stripper poles, many Russians are struggling to afford basic necessities. It's not just about the money, though. It's about the whole vibe. Putin's creating this fantasy world where he can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. It's like he's living in his own personal Disneyland, complete with winter wonderland and adult entertainment. But here's where it gets even crazier. The ice rink and pole dancing room, that's just the tip of the iceberg. This palace has got amenities that would make a 5-star resort look like a motel. We're talking about stuff that most people can't even imagine. Like, there's a casino in there. Not just a few slot machines, but a full-on Vegas-style gambling den. And there's a massive wine cellar stocked with thousands of bottles of the most expensive wines in the world. Putin could throw a party every night for years and never run out of booze. And get this, there's even a hookah lounge. Because apparently, when you're the leader of Russia, sometimes you just need to kick back with a fancy water pipe and some flavored tobacco. It's like Putin took every luxury he could think of and crammed it all into one place. Underground survival bunker. This place has got a massive underground bunker that's straight out of a spy movie. We're talking about a 6,500 square foot complex built to survive anything from wars to revolutions. This ain't your average basement panic room. Putin's got a whole underground city down there. It's got everything he needs to ride out the apocalypse in style. There's a ventilation system to keep the air fresh, sewerage so he doesn't have to worry about plumbing, and a fresh water supply. Putin could literally live down there for months without ever needing to come up for air. The bunker's about 50 meters below ground. That's like burying yourself under a 15-story building. And the walls? They're 15 inches of solid concrete. A nuclear bomb could go off and Putin would barely feel it. But here's the really crazy part. This bunker was built before Putin even annexed Crimea in 2014. It's like he was preparing for something big way before anyone else knew what was coming. Now, you might be thinking, maybe this is just standard for world leaders. But most heads of state don't have private underground cities. Even the White House bunker ain't this fancy. And get this, the company that built it tried to keep it all hush-hush. They called it an underground complex for a resort. Yeah, 'cause every resort needs a nuclear-proof bunker, right? But while Putin's got his own private doomsday hideout, what about regular Russians? Most of them are lucky if their apartment building has a working fire alarm. The average Russian doesn't have a clue what to do in case of a real emergency. It's not just about having a safe place to hide either. This bunker shows how Putin thinks. He's always planning for the worst, always ready to protect himself. But what about the people he's supposed to be leading? And you know what's really wild? Some Russians are getting sick of all this secret luxury. There's this group called Sect Z that leaked images of the bunker. They said they were tired of Putin's stupid face and wanted to show off his paranoid underground transport. Looks like not everyone's impressed with Putin's Bond villain lifestyle. But let's think about what this bunker really means. Putin's got a place where he can hide out if things go bad. He's got food, water, air, everything he needs to survive. Meanwhile, most Russians are struggling just to pay their bills. It's like Putin's playing a different game than everyone else. Secret beach escape. This guy's got an elevator shaft that connects to 2 underground tunnels. One of those tunnels leads straight to a private beach on the Black Sea. It's like Putin's got his own personal subway to paradise. This ain't your average secret passageway. We're talking about a high-tech system built to get Putin out fast if things go south. The tunnel's got everything he needs for a quick getaway. Ventilation, power, the works. It's like something out of a James Bond movie, but it's real. And get this, while Putin's zipping through his secret tunnel to his private beach, most Russians are stuck in traffic. The average commute in Moscow can take over an hour. Putin, he's chilling on his own personal shoreline in minutes. But here's the thing, why does Putin need a secret escape route? This is the guy who's always talking about how strong and tough he is. He's out there riding horses shirtless and doing judo, but he's also got a hidden tunnel to run away. It's like he's trying to have it both ways. The beach at the end of this tunnel ain't your average spot either. It's completely off limits to the public. Putin's got his own slice of the Black Sea coast all to himself. While regular Russians are crowding onto public beaches, Putin's got miles of sand without another soul in sight. And you know what's really crazy? This tunnel system isn't just for beach trips, it's part of a whole network of secret passages. There's another tunnel that goes in the opposite direction, leading to a helipad. So Putin's got options. He can escape by sea or by air. But while Putin's got all these fancy escape routes, what about regular Russians? Most of them are living in apartments without even a fire escape. The average Russian doesn't have a backup plan for when things go wrong. They're just trying to get through the day. Now you might be thinking, maybe this is just standard security for a world leader. But here's the thing. Most presidents don't have secret tunnels leading to private beaches. Even the White House doesn't have an underground escape route to the ocean. And it's not just about security. This tunnel system shows how Putin sees himself. He's got this image of being this strong, fearless leader. But at the same time, he's built himself the ultimate escape route. It's like he's preparing for the day when his own people might turn against him. But let's talk about what this tunnel really means. Putin's got a way to disappear whenever he wants. He can be chilling on his private beach while the rest of Russia thinks he's hard at work in the Kremlin. It's like he's got his own personal portal to another world. And you gotta wonder, what else is Putin hiding? If he's got secret tunnels and private beaches, what other luxuries has he got stashed away? It's like every time we learn something new about this place, it just raises more questions. But while Putin's got his secret escape routes, most Russians are feeling trapped. The economy's been rough, sanctions are hitting hard, and a lot of people are struggling to make ends meet. It's like Putin's living in a whole different world from the people he's supposed to be leading. Leaked photos. Let's talk about what's actually inside Putin's palace. Thanks to Alexei Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation, we got a peek behind those fancy curtains. They released 479 leaked photos of the interior, and let me tell you, it's even crazier than we thought. First up, the living room. This ain't your grandma's cozy little den. We're talking about a space bigger than most people's entire houses. It's got these massive chandeliers that probably cost more than what the average Russian makes in a decade. And the furniture, it's all custom-made, gold-trimmed stuff that looks like it belongs in a museum. But that's just the start. Putin's got a private theater in there, not just a big TV room, but a full-on movie theater with plush red seats and a big screen. While most Russians are watching movies on their laptops, Putin's got his own cinema. And get this, there's a hookah room. Yep, Putin's got a whole room just for smoking fancy tobacco. It's decked out with these ornate pipes and luxurious sofas. Meanwhile, the average Russian is lucky to have a balcony to smoke on. Now, let's talk about the bedroom. Putin's got a bed that's bigger than some Russian apartments. It's got this huge gold headboard and silk sheets that probably cost more than a car. And the view. It looks out over the Black Sea. Most Russians are staring at a brick wall or their neighbor's window. But the real kicker is the bathroom, or should I say, bathrooms. Putin's got multiple, and they're insane. We're talking gold-plated toilets, marble everywhere, and bathtubs that look like small pools. There's even a beauty salon in there. Putin's got his own private spa, while most Russians are sharing a bathroom with their whole family. And you know what's wild? There's a room just for storing fur coats. Not a closet, a whole room. It's temperature controlled to keep all those expensive furs in perfect condition. Meanwhile, most Russians are trying to keep their one winter coat from falling apart. But here's where it gets really crazy. There's a room that's just full of expensive booze. We're talking about shelves and shelves of the most expensive vodka, whiskey, and wine you can imagine. Putin could throw a party every night for years and never run out of fancy drinks. Now, compare all this to what the average Russian's home looks like. Most people are living in Soviet-era apartments that haven't been updated in decades. They've got cramped kitchens, tiny bedrooms, and bathrooms that barely fit one person. While Putin's lounging in his palace, regular folks are dealing with leaky pipes and crumbling walls. The Kremlin's denial game. So we've seen the crazy luxury of Putin's palace, but now let's talk about how the Kremlin's trying to spin all this. They're playing this weird denial game that's hard to believe. The Kremlin keeps saying Putin doesn't own this insane palace. It's like they think if they say it enough times, we'll all just forget about those leaked photos and the no-fly zone. Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, even called the whole thing nonsense. Yeah, 'cause every random Russian citizen has a billion-dollar palace with their own private strip club, right? Peskov's been repeating this denial for years. He's like a broken record, always saying the same thing. Putin doesn't have any palace in Gelendzhik. But here's the thing. If Putin doesn't own it, why is it guarded 24/7 by state security? And what's with that no-fly zone? Seems like a lot of protection for a place that supposedly has nothing to do with the Russian president. The Kremlin's story just doesn't add up. They're saying Putin's got no connection to this place, but then they can't explain why it's more heavily guarded than Fort Knox. It's like they're living in a different reality where billion-dollar palaces just pop up out of nowhere with their own private armies. And it's not just about the palace itself. The Kremlin can't explain where all that money came from. We're talking about $1.3 billion here. That's not chump change. But, according to the Kremlin, it's all just a big misunderstanding. They want us to believe that someone else built this crazy luxury palace right next to Putin's hometown, complete with a pole dancing room and an underground bunker. And Putin's got nothing to do with it. But here's where it gets really wild. Despite all the evidence, the photos, the security, the no-fly zone, the Kremlin's sticking to their story. They're calling it pure nonsense and a compilation. It's like they think if they deny it hard enough, all those leaked photos will just disappear. The thing is, this isn't just about a fancy house, it's about transparency. The Russian government's supposed to be working for the people, but instead, they're playing these denial games. While most Russians are struggling to pay rent, their leaders are living it up in secret palaces and then lying about it. And you gotta wonder, if they're lying about this, what else are they not telling the truth about? It's like every denial just raises more questions. If Putin doesn't own the palace, who does? And why all the secrecy? But the Kremlin's not backing down. They keep insisting that Putin's got nothing to do with this place. Meanwhile, there's a whole underground bunker built to survive World War III, because that's totally normal for a regular vacation home, right? The craziest part is how they're trying to brush it all off. Peskov's acting like it's no big deal, just some wild story someone made up. But we've all seen the photos. We know about the ice rink and the casino and the private beach escape tunnel. This ain't just some fairy tale. And here's the thing. The more the Kremlin denies it, the more suspicious it looks. If there was really nothing to hide, why not just be upfront about it? Why all the secrecy and the denials? It's like they're living in this alternate universe where billion-dollar palaces with underground bunkers are just totally normal things that random citizens build. Meanwhile, most Russians are living in apartments smaller than Putin's bathroom. But the Kremlin's sticking to their story. They're hoping if they keep denying it, we'll all just forget about it and move on. But that's not happening. People are asking questions. They want to know how their leader can afford a palace that costs more than some small countries' entire economies. Follow the money. Turns out, There's this whole web of corruption behind Putin's palace. It's like a real-life game of Monopoly. But instead of fake money, they're playing with billions of real Russian rubles. The whole scheme involves Putin's inner circle. We're talking about his closest buddies and the richest businessmen in Russia. These guys aren't just chipping in for Putin's birthday present. They're funneling massive amounts of cash through a bunch of shell companies to build this insane palace. But here's where it gets really wild. It's not just Putin's rich friends who are paying for this place. There are claims that state-owned companies, companies that are supposed to be working for the Russian people, are actually contributing to Putin's private palace. So while regular Russians are struggling to keep their businesses afloat, state money is being used to build Putin an ice rink and a pole dancing room. It's like if your taxes went to building your mayor a private theme park instead of fixing the roads. And we're not talking about small amounts here. The investigation by Alexei Navalny's team uncovered over 100,000 bank transactions. That's a lot of money moving around, and it all leads back to Putin's palace. Navalny himself put it best when he said, "That is why we call it the world's biggest bribe." Putin's friends, who got the right from him to steal whatever they wanted in Russia, thanked him a lot, but they also chipped in and collected 100 billion rubles and built a palace for their boss with this money. So basically, Putin's letting his buddies rob Russia blind, and in return, they're building him the world's fanciest man cave. It's like a corrupt version of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, but on a billion-dollar scale. Meanwhile, what's life like for the average Russian business owner? They're dealing with high taxes, tons of regulations, and an economy that's been hit hard by sanctions. While Putin's got a wine cellar stocked with thousands of bottles, many Russian businesses are struggling just to keep the lights on. And it's not just businesses that are suffering. The average Russian citizen is feeling the pinch too. While Putin's chilling in his underground bunker, most Russians are living in Soviet-era apartments that are falling apart. The contrast couldn't be more stark. But here's the really crazy part. This isn't just about one really expensive house. This whole scheme shows how corruption works at the highest levels in Russia. It's like a big club, and if you're in it, you get to play by different rules. Experts say this is how the whole system works in Russia. The oligarchs, those super rich businessmen, get to keep most of their money as long as they stay loyal to Putin. So in a way, this palace isn't just Putin's toy. It's a symbol of how the whole corrupt system operates. And you know what's wild? While all this is going on, the Kremlin keeps denying everything. They're saying it's all nonsense, and that Putin's got nothing to do with the palace. But with all these transactions and evidence, it's getting harder and harder to believe them. Public outrage and protests. So Putin's got his secret palace with all these crazy luxuries, but guess what? The Russian people aren't having it. When Alexei Navalny dropped that investigation exposing all the details about Putin's billion-dollar crib, it was like he lit a match in a room full of gasoline. The whole country exploded with anger. We're talking about protests in over 100 cities across Russia. That's huge. People were out in the streets and they weren't just mad. They were getting creative with it. You know what became the symbol of these protests? Gold-painted toilet brushes. Yeah, you heard that right. Toilet brushes. See, Navalny's investigation uncovered that Putin's palace had these fancy toilet brushes that cost like $700 each. So protesters started waving these gold toilet brushes around as a way of calling out the crazy corruption. It's like they were saying, "Hey Putin, we know about your golden throne and we're not impressed." But it wasn't just about toilet brushes. These protests were about something way bigger. It was like all the anger about inequality in Russia just came boiling up at once. You've got Putin chilling in his billion-dollar mansion with ice rinks and pole dancing rooms while regular Russians are struggling to pay rent. That kind of contrast, it doesn't sit well with people. And it wasn't just a bunch of young troublemakers out there. We're talking about all kinds of Russians, old, young, rich, poor. They were all united by this feeling that something's seriously wrong with how things are run in Russia. But here's where it gets really wild. The Russian government? They didn't take too kindly to all these people speaking up. They started cracking down hard. We're talking about over 3,700 people getting arrested. That's a lot of folks ending up in handcuffs just for saying they're not cool with their president having a secret luxury palace. And you know what's crazy? These protests weren't even just about the palace. It was like Navalny's investigation was the last straw. People were fed up with corruption, with the gap between the rich and poor, with feeling like they don't have a say in how their countries run. It's like Putin's palace became this symbol of everything that's messed up in Russia. You've got people who can barely afford food, and then you've got their leader building himself a private kingdom with gold everything and underground bunkers. It's no wonder people got mad. But the Russian government tried to play it cool. They were like, oh, these protests are no big deal. It's just a small group of troublemakers. But when you've got people in Siberia coming out to protest in temperatures below zero, you know it's serious. These folks were risking frostbite just to make their voices heard. And it wasn't just about the numbers. The energy at these protests was something else. People were chanting, holding up signs, and waving those golden toilet brushes. It was like all the frustration that had been building up for years just came pouring out. But here's the thing. These protests weren't just a one-time deal. They kept happening week after week. Even with all the arrests and the government crackdowns, people kept coming back out. It's like they'd gotten a taste of speaking up, and they weren't about to stop. A state within a state. Alexei Navalny, the guy who exposed this whole thing, called it a separate state within Russia. And he ain't wrong. This palace isn't just some fancy house. It's like Putin's built his own little country inside Russia. He's got his own security force, his own no-fly zone, even his own rules. While the rest of Russia's dealing with one reality, Putin's living in a whole different world. Think about it. Putin's got a place that's bigger than Monaco. It's got its own vineyards, amphitheater, and even a freaking ice palace. Meanwhile, most Russians are living in tiny apartments that haven't been updated since the Soviet days. But it's not just about the size. This palace is like a symbol of how Putin runs Russia. He's set up this system where he and his buddies can do whatever they want, while everyone else has to follow the rules. It's like there's two Russias, one for Putin and his crew, and another for everyone else. And get this, the palace has its own border checkpoint. Yeah, you heard that right. It's like Putin's created his own little country within Russia. He's got more security than some actual countries. While regular Russians are dealing with long lines at border crossings, Putin's got his own private entrance to his personal kingdom. But here's where it gets really wild. This palace isn't just about luxury, it's about power. Putin's built himself a place where he can control everything. He's got underground tunnels for quick escapes, a bunker that can survive World War III, and tech that's probably years ahead of what the rest of Russia's got. Meanwhile, what's life like for the average Russian? They're dealing with crumbling infrastructure, hospitals that are falling apart, and schools that can't afford basic supplies. It's like all the money that should be going to make life better for regular folks is getting sucked into Putin's private paradise. And you know what's crazy? This palace isn't even officially Putin's. On paper, it belongs to some company that's owned by another company that's owned by Putin's buddies. It's like this giant shell game where Putin gets all the perks, but none of the responsibility. But let's talk about what this state within a state really means for regular Russians. While Putin's got his own private beach and forest, most Russians are lucky if they can afford a week's vacation somewhere cheap. While he's got a wine cellar worth millions, many Russians are struggling to put food on the table. It's not just about the money, though. This palace shows how disconnected Putin is from regular Russian life. He's living in this bubble where everything's perfect and luxurious. How can he understand what real Russians are going through when he's so far removed from their reality? And here's something to think about. If Putin's got his own little state, what does that mean for the rest of Russia? It's like he's created this system where he's above the law, above the rules that everyone else has to follow. That's not how a democracy is supposed to work. But you know what's really wild? Even with all this luxury, Putin still tries to present himself as this tough guy who's just like everyone else. He's out there riding horses shirtless and doing judo, but then he goes home to a palace that's worth more than some countries' entire economies.